Hello, guys. I represent DataMagic, a mobile market analysis service, and our topic today is featuring. What's the main question about featuring? How to get some, right? But this magic is beyond our control. As an analytics service, we suppose that the primary fundamental question regarding featuring is how can we measure it? Featuring may be a significant driver of an app's success, so we need a deterministic way to measure it, as same as any other key metric. When it comes to your own apps, it's not a rocket science. You just measure revenue downloads, uplifts that you had during the featuring, and since you know your LTV model and key factor, you are able to get the best estimation available, the overall monetary value that featuring brought you. But what if you need to investigate featuring of others' apps? I'm sure that for many of you it's not really clear why might we need it. So I tried to set up a list of the main general reasons. What is the actual role of featuring for your business? Can featuring be considered one of the pillars of your business economy? A clear answer to this question might lead you to some changes in your business plans and priorities. I constantly meet people that are sure that proper platform relations might bring you featuring that may turn your business from unprofitable to sustainably profitable. And at the same time, I meet people that are sure that nowadays featuring became a neglectable factor. So who of them is right, or can they both be right? We'll try to sort it out today. The second question is, what featuring support do your competitors receive, and can they measure it? To answer this question, we need to find a way to effectively monitor and measure featuring cases of all competitors' apps and the apps of your own. Our tool solves this task completely. And the third question is, what are the best ways to maximize platform support? What is a reasonable amount of effort that is worth investing into relationships with platforms? Our tool is not really a crystal ball to answer questions like this, but answering the first questions in this list might really help you to better understand the role of featuring for your business, and by means of that, to answer this particular question. So let's discuss the method that we suggest for featuring measurement. The challenge of featuring measurement is mainly complicated by the fact that being featured often implies having a lot of simultaneous featuring placements on different platforms in different countries and via an unclear number of different featuring placements. Here's a typical picture of what a random large-scale featuring looks like. On the 6th of October, Angry Birds 2 had 867 different featuring placements. Impressive, right? How can we estimate the cumulative power of all these placements? We clearly understand that revenue and installs that featuring might generate for you depends on many factors, and first of all, on your app. So we claim that we do not estimate the featuring, the revenue and installs uplifts that featuring gonna bring you, but we calculate an abstract score that visualizes the value of the featuring of a placement of a featuring placement. We measure a download uplift that every featuring placement generates in average, and combine it with the data about average LTV for each country and each platform, and take into consideration the duration of a featuring case, the impact of saturation effect. Saturation effect means that the longer featuring lasts, the less is daily value of the featuring. So the ever less featuring daily effect tends to 0. Let me give you a simple example. Let's assume that some topmost banner brings twice as many users than the same banner brings in the USA. At the same time, we know that the Brazilian users' LTV is 20 times less than the LTV of an average USA user. Altogether, it turns out that USA banner has 10 times more value than the Brazilian one. Make sense? So it's the real math is much more complicated, but the approach is the same. We want to emphasize it once more. We aim to predict neither the amount of money nor the number of downloads that featuring generates. What we do is calculate an abstract numeric score that shows you the level of support that an app gets from platforms, the desiredness of given featuring placements. This approach, in turn, allows us to apply math and perform analysis of featuring of any kind. We calculate total average, median, total, or whatever featuring score for an app, or for a group of apps, or for the whole platform or a country. Here is, for example, how the top featured publishers chart looks like on DataMagic. So here we see the total featuring score for the whole September 2018 for all apps of each publisher. So now you understand what super large publisher score in our system looks like. Sure thing, we're able to select any geographic region, store, or time period as this screen. Or also, we made it possible to investigate featuring history of any particular app. Have a look at the example of how we can check out by country the composition of featuring support an app had. Important note, we do not analyze personalized featuring of both stores as a completely different story and does not relate to the intentionally managed featuring in any way. However, recommended for you sections make up a huge share of organic traffic, but meanwhile, we still cannot measure it as every user has some personalized offers from platforms. Though we do know that platforms have guidelines on how to make your app appear in these personalized collections more often. These guidelines mostly devoted to having better conversion rate and ratings and less failure rate. Our team prepared several examples of featuring analysis, and here's the most complex and interesting one. We decided to find out, do platforms distribute their featuring capabilities across genres fairly enough according to their market share? Is there any significant disproportion? To give a better understanding of what I call disproportion, let's assume that some genre gets 5% of downloads in a particular country, in a particular store, and 50% of all the platforms featuring capabilities. So we call it 3x positive disproportion. Featuring share is 3x times more than download share, or vice versa. If the genre has only 15% of downloads in this particular platform in this country, and only 5% of featuring share, we call it 3x negative disproportion. Why do we base this analysis on downloads? Let's try to base the analysis both on downloads and revenue and compare them. So here I have a complicated graph. Each circle stands for a genre in a particular country. The size of a circle means a share of the whole featuring capabilities in each particular country. The color stands for disproportion. So merry green circles stand for positive disproportion of 5x or more, and bloody red circle stands for negative disproportion of 5x and more. So here we can see some green columns and some red columns. For example, we see that MMO strategies and dating and casino apps and slots have really small share of featuring compared to the revenue share they bring to platforms. At the same time, we see green columns for action arcade and for racing games, for example, and for hyper-casual games. It means that the featuring share these apps get is much more than the revenue rate that these genres generate. Let me show you some specific numbers. Here, for example, you can see that for hyper-casual games, these games sometimes revenue, most of the times, they generate much less than 1% of revenue, and have like 4 or 5% of all the featuring capabilities of iOS in these countries. So this proportion sometimes jump up to 200 in Japan. So the featuring share is 200 times more than the share of revenue in this country. Or actually, I don't know why platforms do this, because hyper-casual games do not generate any revenue for platform, and at the same time they generate some ad revenue. They totally passes Apple's bank account. So I actually have no idea why platforms support hyper-casual games that much. So let's have a look at, for example, racing games. We see nearly the same situation. The share of revenue is really low, but the share of featuring is quite significant, like 3 or 5%. So the positive disproportion sometimes jump up to 27 in Japan or 11 in Taiwan. Let's have a look at some more interesting phenomena. For example, you see that MOBA has only 3 big green dots in 3 countries: Great Britain, France, and Germany. In these countries, this genre generates really very low share of revenue, but the featuring share is quite significant, more than 1%, which turns out as a disproportion from 5 to 9. For some reason, editorial teams of iOS in these countries really tend to support mobile genre. Actually, I have no idea, because let's have a look at MMO strategy. At all the countries, the negative disproportion is really bad. It might be explained by low conversion rates from a featuring banner views to installs, but I don't really believe that conversion rate for mobile games is any better. But for me, it looks like that German and French and Britain editorial teams just love mobile genre and just want to support it. Let's compare it to downloads-based analysis. You see that circles, revenue, downloads. Oh, give me a second to just explain. So you see that circles are of the same size, because the size of the circle stands for share of featuring, but the colors are absolutely different. We see, for example, that hyper-casual column became red. What it means is that despite the fact that this genre gets quite nice featuring, the download share is huge comparing to the featuring share, so it turns out as a negative disproportion. Or let's have a look at big green circles of party bottlers. They get quite significant featuring share, and they have huge revenue share, but the download share is quite low. The dating and casino and slots columns are still red, so this genre looks like cursed. Let's now have a look at Google Play Store analysis. This is a revenue-based analysis. We see even more giant circles for party bottlers, and they are less red, which means that Google Play seems to support these genres a bit better. Let's have a closer look. We see that in Japan, party bottlers generate more than 60% of all the revenue in the country, and gets 25% of all the featuring capabilities in the country, but the disproportion is still negative. It's like 2.5x negative disproportion. The same in Japan for action MMORPG, for Korea. This genre brings in Korea nearly 50% of revenue and gets 60% of featuring, but the disproportion is still negative, because I believe platforms just cannot give them 50% of all the featuring capabilities to this genre. Um, the columns for Action Arcade and Racing and Action Other are still green. Same for Hyper Casual. The only exclusion, I believe, is Japan. Yeah. Oh no, this proportion is 377. Great. So we see that the picture is nearly really similar to what we saw when we were looking at the iOS plot, but we see also that Google seemed to support more genres that generate more revenue. Let's have a look at downloads-based analysis. You see, again, the circles of, the sizes of the circles are the same, but the colors are different. Again, party butlers generate really low share of downloads, but huge share of featuring, which turns out as great positive disproportion. But the whole picture is less contrast, less red circles and less super green circles. So the picture looks a little bit more balanced. So so now we get closer to answering the question that we had in the very beginning. What is the actual role of featuring for your business, and can the featuring be one of the pillars of your business economy? So it highly depends on the genre and country that you bet on. And sure, it depends on your business burn rate and some other factors that we cannot discuss it as we only have half an hour now. Featuring score is a tool that we give you to help understand platforms' featuring policies, the benefits featuring might bring you to your business, and then you are to make decisions. That's all for the main topic, but I'd love to tell you about some interesting findings that we came across while preparing the talk. So we decided to check, do the largest publishers get unproportionately large share of featuring? So to cut it short, for Google it's definitely so. In the publisher score column, you see what we call publisher score. It's an average monthly sum of revenue in US dollars and downloads. So in 2018, Electronic Arts, in average, had a sum of 70 million US dollars in revenue. Why do we make this sum? Because it allows us to compare publishers that generate a huge revenue and a little amount of installs, or vice versa, huge amount of installs and really a tiny revenue. We can compare them on a single axis, and actually it works quite fine. So we see that the biggest support from Google Play Store in September in this specified time period has Electronic Arts, then Supercell, Tencent, and so on. Green lines, green colors stand for very successful publishers. Red lines would stand for really unsuccessful or low performers, and yellow are for medium-sized publishers. So let's say, for example, we can just estimate that Dev Sisters Corporation had, let's say, $1 million revenue and 2 million downloads monthly in average. Let's have a look at the second page. Here we see first two red lines, but still a lot of green color. And on the third page, we see more yellow and more red. So it tells us once more time that Google first supports publishers that generate a huge amount of revenue. Let's jump to iOS. At the very first page, we see a lot of red lines. So it tells us that Apple really supports no-name publishers sometimes. Sometimes it even gives a rise to question, like, how the hell these publishers get there? Like, what's next app? How did they get this huge, outstanding featuring support? Let's go to the second page. And second page and the third page look nearly the same. A lot of red and yellow colors. So Apple doesn't look like to be supporting the most successful publishers instead of King, Electronic Arts. The next phenomenon I would love to talk about is hunk featuring phenomenon. We've already described what saturation effect is. So assuming that platforms are interested in advancing their store's explorability, platforms should want to rotate featuring placements as quick as possible to maximize the novelty effect and the mentioned explorability. However, we notice a significant amount of apps that are keeping their strong featuring placements for months. Here you see in the days column that all values are 62. It's because we just recently started collecting information about featuring. So as we only started collecting this information, all these apps already has been featuring. And they are still featured. And don't change their featuring placements a lot. They sometimes get some additional featuring, but the main featuring placements are constantly held by these apps. So the column featuring VOWOD stands for the featuring way of calculation that was worked out without saturation effect. So what the featuring effect would look like if every next day of the featuring was the same valuable as the first day. And effectiveness is a comparison about the featuring calculated with WOD and with saturation effect and without saturation effect. So we see that average effectiveness of featuring for these apps is like 5–6%. Let's have a look at Google's page. We see nearly the same picture, 62 days for some apps. We see a lot of kids apps here, but the featuring, the effectiveness is really low. So we compared the overall platform featuring score, considering the saturation effect and without it. And we will see that the saturation effect, in other words, the low speed of apps between placements, fades away 80% of platform featuring capabilities on iOS and 89% for Android. I see that I'm running out of time, so let's jump to this slide. Our featuring measurement tool is free for use, so please welcome to DataMagic Rocks. And if you have any feedback, please write me directly. And maybe we have a couple of minutes for questions and answers.
Thank you, Max. Аплодисменты.